If you think I'm going to do an in-depth breakdown of the Palace game, you're mistaken. This was a season-ending celebration. It was a Palace party. The score, the effort, completely inconsequential. And yet I went on social media and sure enough, there were some Villa fans melting down. But I mean, if people want to rage for a meaningless game, that's their business. I'd prefer to talk about some of the other things that have happened since, transfer speculation, and some other interesting news nuggets. So let's get into it. Palace 5, Villa 0. I'm not sure how you feel when a season comes to an end, especially when it was such an incredible season with so many great moments and highlights. But I have to admit, I abandoned the Villa Palace game at halftime when I heard that West Ham and Arsenal scored late in the first half. So I went over to the title chase. And all I could think at that time as I'm watching this unfold is that our win at the Emirates probably derailed Arsenal's title challenge. In fact, the 6 points we took from the Gunners ended up having a major impact on the title chase. Now we're in this funny period of reflection with one eye on the future. Of course, there's going to be a lot of off-season activity, I predict. Then we have the Euros, and before you know it, we've got preseason in the US and in Germany, and it's going to fly by like that. And I guess for me, the lingering question is, can we replicate such a great season and maybe even take it that one step further? And you know, the people who are in charge were brought here for that very purpose. Keep going that way. Obviously, the next evolution, the next milestone for this club has to be silverware. And I was shocked about how many people posted on various social media channels that they would have preferred winning the Europa Conference League title over qualification for the Champions League. And I don't agree with that personally, even though it has been a long time for this club. But what the owners and what Unai Emery and Monchi desires is to be competitive across all competitions consistently and for a long time, which is one of the reasons why I think we are into a major overhaul this summer and not just tinkering. And so qualifying for Champions League helps us in that direction, but also what we learned from that Europa Conference League campaign is going to be really, really valuable. We are not going to get caught short depth-wise this coming season, and I highly doubt we're going to have the degree of injuries that we suffered last season. As for the game on Sunday, I will say this. We all knew it was going to be a difficult challenge given that Palace were one of the most informed teams in the league, and our record at Sellers Park of late has been abysmal. The only win, the John McGinn top corner perler from a couple of seasons ago under Steven Gerrard. And fair play to Oliver Glasner. He has done a sensational job in such a short period of time, and it's going to be a very interesting offseason for the Eagles because I think they're going to have a tough time holding on to all of Eze, Elise, and the completely rejuvenated Mateta. And they're also going to have a hard time keeping Dougie Freeman, their sporting director, who has found basically a lot of those players, including their Morgan Rogers this year, Adam Wharton from Blackburn. What a signing he's turned out to be. So trying to get from 10th, which is a sensational finish considering where they were, to 9th is similar to the job Villa has to do. How do you climb the table further next year? Just on the final prize money, Villa earned 52.9 million pounds for their share of the domestic and international broadcast revenue. As a comparison, that's 10 million more than what Newcastle earned in 7th, which is where we finished last year. Crystal Palace, also for comparison, finished 10th, earning 34 million pounds. Now, I know we all want to win a trophy, but when you think about that prize money, in addition to the Europa Conference League campaign and Champions League qualification, well, that is a dramatic uptick in competition revenue from even 2 years ago, and that really does help us. One of the quirky outcomes of that loss on Sunday is what it did to our final goal difference for the season. And I want to pull out this prognostication from my preseason prediction show back in August. But Aston Villa will significantly increase its goal difference in the coming season. How significantly? Well, we were at +5. I think we're tripling it to +15. Why was I so orange in that episode? I look like Donald Trump. Anyway, we all like to say, I told you so, but I mean, come on, isn't that spooky? We start the season with a 5-1 thumping at Newcastle. We end the season with a 5-0 loss at Crystal Palace. But in the end, our goal difference is exactly +15. Why can't I do that with the lotto numbers? What a lovely, award-winning day to end the season in London. And incredibly, our undefeated streak in the capital came to a crunching end on the last possible day. Samir Gaby was in the house on this raucous roadshow wearing this gold version of the Henson Division Retro Revival kit, and here he is with Paul White from the Villains on Tour Facebook group. And here's how the traveling support reacted minute by minute throughout the game. Let's do this now and just get it out of the way. Our final points tally in the categories I've been following while doing this show. And at the end of the day, all that matters is our table position. But in these numbers, we do see some clues and areas for improvement, starting with our set piece success. That will 100% be reviewed this off season. We need to increase the clean sheets too if we want to advance further next year on all fronts. And such a shame that Watkins couldn't hit 20 in the league, but he was the Premier League's Playmaker of the Year with the most assists, and he has said, I'm going to be better next year. By the way, congratulations to Ollie Watkins and Ezri Konsa. No shock, but they're named to Gareth Southgate's England squad for this summer's Euros. Gives me an excuse to cheer slightly for England. I'm a German. But what an experience. What an honor. And I hope they do get to play and become influential and ideally heroes, because think about the information and what that will do for their careers. But I also would love for them to have a little bit of rest as well. And what a shame for Morgan Rogers to get injured when he did, because there were a lot of murmurs that he was getting closer and closer to that England squad by the week. Just going back to the points tally that I update after every regular season game, and our record against the top 6, which is hard to do because the top 6 teams were changing an awful lot throughout the season. So I might have to look at that a different way next year. But if you took just the final top 4, City, Arsenal, Liverpool, and ourselves, we had the best record in the games between us 4. 10 points out of 18. Tops in that little mini group. Who would have predicted that? And that's encouraging for next year.
I'm Tony. My name's John. And we're watching the Holy Trinity Show.
How about those two beauties, Tony Carter and John Emmon, viewers of this program? I'm routinely shocked and thrilled by who watches this show and from where. And I'll bet Tony and John were thinking the same thing I did when I saw that lineup. They might have talked about it on the way home on the bus, same as you. How many of those players that started that game are going to be back next year? Now, I could see a world where as many as 6 of these players right here are not back. For sure, Longley and Chambers. That's a Shea given. But Dean, Carlos, Luiz, Duran, they are 100% all in the evaluation stage, which is being discussed among ownership and our football hierarchy right now as we speak. One of the reasons why I think we're looking at more of an overhaul this summer rather than some tinkering, around the edges of our squad is because I feel like we've been groomed as Villa fans regarding this financial situation we found ourselves in. And I know you probably occasionally click on those awful clickbaity sites that spread all these rumors. Well, one of the dirty things about football is that agents and sporting directors alike will filter news in the direction of some of the people in those publications or even the bigger ones to plant some seeds here and there, create leverage. Well, there has been a lot of talk around Aston Villa, and a lot of that talk is about our financial situation and how we may need to sell a name to bring in names. Listen, I get it. People don't want to see big, popular, influential players move on, and they especially don't want to see them move on to a rival club in the same league where they might come back and bite you in the same competition. But we have to look at players the same way. They are sellable assets. And that's how Monchi's looking at it. And by the way, if you're an agent, the only way you make money is your player moves or gets a bumper new deal. So if you're Douglas Luiz's agent, what are you telling your client right now on $75K when all the players around him are on more? So Monchi is potentially one of the best in the world at playing this game, the football market. And he has a manager who is so crystal clear about the criteria that he needs from his specific targets that it makes Monchi's job easy. This is probably what he was missing at Roma. And that's why I think this is a match made in heaven, and we got to take the emotion out of these types of decisions. If I had to put a list together of the players who I think the club perceives as untouchable, I would obviously start with Emi Martinez. I mean, the guy wanted to play Champions League football, and he wanted to play it with our club. But I'd also have Ezri Konsa in there with Pau Torres. He's the teacher's pet. Boubacar Kamara, John McGinn, Yuri Tielemans. You'd have Leon Bailey, Watkins, Diaby, and even Rodgers. Because, there's no way a manager would sell a player after only a year. Now, the Douglas Luiz of August through February would be an untouchable. The Luiz of February to close of season, that's a different matter, and we'll talk about Doug a little bit more in depth later. Not untouchable per se, but very unlikely to move would be Buendia, Mings, and Ramsey because, it's hard to sell a player after a season out with injuries. And we do want to keep some homegrown players in our squad as well. Now, if you were to sell Ramsey, and he recently came out and said, no, I want to stay with Villa, my boyhood club, and play in the Champions League, well, you'd want to sell him after he's had a bumper season, not a truncated, injury-plagued one. Now, that list of untouchables I showed you did not include Diego Carlos, and there's been speculation about his departure to Milan, but also Luca Dean and John Duran. And just those three players alone could garner a fair bit of transfer income for us, not to mention a clear out of wages. But when you add that to the outgoing players like Phil Coutinho, Morgan Sanson, who's now moved on, Callum Chambers, Den Donker, who's linked with Everton, Cameron Archer, who I don't think is going to stick with us, but is pure profit as well as an academy player, and even Tim Irogbunum, who's been linked with Ajax, I don't think any of those players have a place in our squad right now. And by clearing all of those out, again, you're giving yourself a lot of transfer wiggle room. And I believe, as I've said before, this process of a summer overhaul began months ago with Monchi laying some groundwork. And Unai Emery has said himself recently, we're probably going to see some departures before we see incomings, unless I would assume those incomings are free, like Hermoso, for example. Luiz's situation is unique in that he has been persistently linked with Arsenal for several seasons, so obviously Edu is an admirer, and he's still there, and he's going to want to add to the squad that fell 2 points short of winning the title this past year. Luiz is also a shockingly fair earner, like not a breathtaking wage packet, and there's been no inkling of a contract extension for him. He would also command one of the higher transfer fees from anyone in our squad right now. And sometimes, to bring in two really good players, you have to sell one. And it's not the transfer amount that you have to match the ingoing versus outgoing. It's the amortized value over 3 years that matters, and Luiz can really help in that regard. You may have also noticed that we've been linked with a lot of central midfielders in the run-up to the opening of the window. Carlos Soler at PSG, Gabriel Viega in Saudi Arabia, Conor Gallagher, and most recently, Ross Barkley. According to several publications and reporters, including, here we go, Fabrizio Romano, Villa is advanced on Ross Barkley. Now, initially in that 2020 loan, he was very productive, playing almost as a 10 behind Watkins alongside Grealish and Trezeguet and McGinn. And then it tailed off quite drastically. But that's a different role to what he was playing at Luton, where he was a central midfielder. And I watched Luton 3 to 4 times this year. I was shocked at how influential he was in those games. And now here's where Villa has gone from signing players because of reputation to a far more concise criteria-oriented approach. Like, did you know that Ross Barkley was in the top 1% in all of Europe for successful take-ons per 90 minutes? Now, how that stat translates practically on the field of play is that Barkley can receive a ball, beat the first opponent, and then play in an attack-minded teammate. Does this not sound exactly how Unai Emery wants to play? And at 30 years of age, he's still young enough, has bags of Premier League experience. He's familiar with the club already, and he's played with many of those same players who are still around from 2020 and 2021. And if you're chasing a game, he's the perfect player. Emi Martinez to Ross Barkley or Pau Torres to Barkley, beat the first man, play in Leon Bailey, boom. The score is now level. Now, if you're holding a lead, Ross Barkley is one of the last players you'd want on the park because he's one of the statistical worst in all of Europe at tackles. What a wide range of data that is. And as I will say with any potential or new Villa recruit, if he's good enough for Unai Emery and Monchi, he's good enough for me. Now, I get fans get very emotionally attached to players, especially when they see them come in as raw, progress and improve, and then help the club to bigger and better things. I get it. We don't want those players to leave because they feel like family, and one of the best ways of describing Aston Villa as a football club is it is a family club, an intergenerational family club. So I get it. There is emotion. I saw a comment on one of my recent shows saying you'd have to be a clown to sell Duran or Douglas Luiz. Well, that's an emotional statement because I want the hierarchy of my club to look at every single player the same way. A sellable asset, and you sell them at the height of their value, and then you buy and start again and keep doing it over and over. And Unai Emery keeps saying we need to be strategic and we need to be intelligent. And in those two words, there is no room for emotion. And I just feel with Douglas Luiz, something has changed. I don't know what. I mean, he was suspended, so he missed 2 games. I don't think it's fatigue. He actually had fewer games than some of his teammates. I don't know what it is, but we don't get 360-degree access to these players the way the hierarchy does. Just with John Duran, I'm not sure if you heard this report that the big Colombian allegedly redecorated, some might say damaged, his apartment to the tune of about £12,000, which is less than the damage he did to his car a couple of weeks ago. But nonetheless, the club has apparently had to intervene in the matter. And the irony is that Duran and Emery live in the same building. So John Duran, like everybody else on the team, is a chip that the club could potentially play. Although these kinds of news reports do not help appreciate what could be a pretty decent transfer value. On to some business news now, and there was lots of it, including the very soft launch of Villa's updated Crest, which was revealed along with the Adidas announcement that I guess had to wait until the end of the season because of previous contractual obligations with the prior supplier. And after the initial trademark application leak, if you will, I said at the time there is no way this is going to be the final badge for which I now owe Acorns 100 pounds. And by the way, I'm fully happy to present a 100-pound check to Paul Cadman of Acorns. But after so much consternation and surveying and frankly a very messy process all in all, I was really underwhelmed in the end with how that badge was finally revealed. And maybe that's why. Maybe it was because it was such a contentious process that they just kind of slipped it in the way they did. But I also want to point to the trademark application, which came out in public, of course, of this version of the badge, which is far more detailed. If you put the lions over top of each other, they are the exact same shape, just one is more detailed, which has me wondering, is Villa going to release a commemorative crest for the 150th anniversary season upcoming, or is this maybe a special Champions League version of the badge? Chris Heck said it himself, the most important thing about your brand is continuity. So this represents a tweak, really, a curvature of the outline, the name, the date, the star is still there, maybe a little bit more detail in the lion, but ultimately it is just a tweak from what Randy Lerner introduced almost 20 years ago. Chris Heck also made some big revelations this week in a Marketing Week online article where he said that when he arrived, it seemed that the club was more focused on being efficient rather than ambitious. And that's a big claim to make in retrospect. But he also made the stunning revelation that our total worldwide audience is somewhere around 300 million. Now that sounds very big to me, and I don't know how they would come to that actual conclusion, but if that's the case, then we really do have a global market to serve and grow. And by the way, I would love even 0.01% of that total worldwide audience to subscribe to this channel. Incidentally, this channel celebrates its 3rd anniversary next week, which is impossible to believe and would never have happened without you and guys like Clive Plattman. Clive's wife, Michelle, has been relentless. I mean, she's been man-marking me for months to make sure I preemptively wish her husband Clive a happy 70th birthday, which doesn't even happen until July. This is Clive down at the local barber's just a few days ago, and look who he bumps into, Maddie Cash, and as you could see, there's a slight difference in workload between the two clients for the barbers here, but happy birthday, Clive. Enjoy your 70th this summer. I believe they're right now in a fantastic American city, the quirky Portland, Oregon. What a place. If you get a chance, go to Cafe Mingo in the Alphabet District. Fantastic, cozy little Italian joint. And while we're doing shoutouts, this is Jason Murphy with show sponsor Paul Handsaker of 24/7 Services. Not only is Jason a monstrous Aston Villa fan and viewer of the Holy Trinity Show, but he is also the site supervisor at Paul's kids' school, which in itself would be a huge job because Paul has so many children. So thank you for watching, Jason. I truly appreciate it. And last week I mentioned that 24/7 Services is enthusiastically recruiting painters because there is so much work coming up. It's summertime after all. So if you or someone you know is adept with a brush and you have your own transportation, I've put an email in the description of this video. You could pretty much start right away. Well, there you have it. That was a hodgepodge, a veritable potpourri of subjects to cover on the final regular season episode of the Holy Trinity Show. And as I've said over and over again, I expect a lot of activity in the transfer market between now and mid-ish July. And I'm not going to do a show on every single rumor that pops up on the clickbaity media. I'd prefer to do signed, sealed, and delivered players when they finally arrive. But I will be ready, and I'm also ready to release some other material your way this summer. Until our next visit, stay awesome, and as always, up the mighty Villa!